Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Compass, it's like a tongue punch to your... we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-founder and co-publisher, also of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing just fine. Interesting to know what this tongue punch is all about. So
we're going to be talking about some tongue punches.
Yeah.
We have several things to talk about this week. We will actually get to just a wee little bit of national presidential level punditry. Of course, everybody's talking this week. Big Democratic National Convention in Chicago. We do have a slightly localized angle on that. But before we get there, we're going to make you listen to zoning. County Commission making some major decisions about a controversial project in South Knoxville. City Council approved a new and somewhat novel form of assistance for affordable housing. Knox County Schools is calling parents to let them know if their children, students in the schools, are requesting different pronouns and names to be used. We'll talk about that. But Scott, to start off, we are going to revisit the saga of Benny Smith, who we talked about last month. There was a lot of interest in his pending departure from WUTK, the student radio station on the University of Tennessee campus. And Scott, this was an interesting story, I think, because, you know, there's always this perception that the University of Tennessee, to some degree, exists within its own bubble, within the city of Knoxville. That sort of constant, you know, the town gown thing. You hear about this in a lot of cities that have major universities. It tends to be sort of its own ecosystem. And WUTK, the student radio station, for quite some time now, has been one of the manifestations of the University of Tennessee that's actually kind of crossed that boundary, right?
Yeah. It was, it's kind of the second son of the radio world at UT, the WOT. Everybody thinks about WOT and public radio and All Things Considered and all those things. WTK was student run. They played a lot of eclectic music. It was, and they did a lot of support for the local music scene, which is pretty. They've done this for so long. I mean, it's really as much of a community asset as it is a university asset.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And, a lot of that has been built up over time under the leadership of Benny Smith. He had been the general manager there from starting in 2004, so basically 20 years. And he had affiliations with it before that. He worked at the station as a student in the 1980s, graduated from UT, went off and got some experience in music promotion and in broadcasting, and then ended up coming back there to run the student station in 2004. And, as you were talking, you were using past tense in, that it has been this or it had been that. And I think we should be clear that like WUTK is still on the air. You can go and listen to it. They are still playing a lot of the standard kinds of music that you would expect to hear on college radio. And it is, you're still hearing student DJ voices. All of that is there. But I think that what you said about its engagement and importance to the local music scene explains why there was so much interest and concern in July when suddenly we all heard that Benny Smith had been placed on administrative leave, and then an announcement came out that he was going to, quote unquote, retire as of the end of the year. And they were transitioning the radio station to new management and sort of a new administrative structure and so forth. The reason that people outside the university cared about this, maybe more than people inside the university, at least from some of the documents that we're going to be talking about here in a minute, is that it has had this really significant presence for a couple of decades in the music scene, and Benny Smith himself in particular has been kind of, seen as this significant figure, both for students at the university who have worked at the radio station. Lots of students who have come through UT have given, encomiums to him in the past month about how he helped them, including many people who are now working in, professional broadcasting. But of course, so there were all these questions like what exactly happened here? Because in July, the only formal announcements were that he had been placed on administrative leave and then that he was retiring. So we at Compass filed a public records request, as did many other media in town, kind of trying to figure out like what had happened here. And it took the university a little while to process all of those records requests. We had this interesting, from a news and journalism standpoint, a somewhat interesting series of developments this week, because as far as I can tell, what UT did was they processed all of those different records requests, and then they responded to them all on the same day, which was this past Tuesday, and we had a story about this on Wednesday. But we all asked for somewhat different records. That's my supposition anyway, based on the somewhat different stories that came out of this. So the News Sentinel had a story, WBIR had a story, we had a story, maybe somebody else in town did that I missed. And if you go and look through all of those different reports, they sound a little bit different because I think we all asked for somewhat different things. And so we all kind of got bits and pieces of this bigger picture, the story of the blind men and the elephant to some degree. We're all trying to figure out like, what is the elephant here? So I am going from the records that we received, combined a little bit with some of the stuff that especially the News Sentinel reported, because they received a copy of an internal audit that had been done of WUTK. In the records that I received, there were references to this audit, but I didn't actually have a copy of the audit. I could argue that the request that I filed probably should have also produced that audit, but I'm not going to fight with UT about that at this point because all of this information is out there. And UT did provide a fair amount of information to me. And, what I found most interesting, I asked for documents related to Smith's employment there, but I also asked for emails and correspondence between Smith and some UT administrators and or between the administrators themselves about the future of WUTK. And the picture that I think really emerges from those emails, to me, ended up sketching out a somewhat familiar picture. Because even though we're talking about a university, we're talking about a student radio station, this felt to me not unlike a lot of other media stories that we see. And media stories that I have intimate engagement with in some cases, where a sort of smaller, scrappier, popular, maybe cult following like media outlet gets absorbed into some larger more bureaucratic, more buttoned down type of operation. And, in the private sector, we've tended to see this with things like, I don't know, when the News Sentinel bought Metropulse, for example, and ended up shutting it down about 6 or 7 years later. But that's what this ultimately looks like to me. And, there was kind of a sequence of things that have happened at UT in the last few years. In 2021, a new dean of the College of Communication and Information came in. Joe Mazur was hired from Clemson University to take over the communications school there, which includes the journalism program and all of the different communications programs they have. Then last year, Mazur hired a new general manager of WUOT, which you mentioned, which we all think of as like the NPR station. But, it's a public radio station that is based at the University of Tennessee, largely supported by, listener funding. But Jody Hamblett is the new general manager there, and she replaced Regina Dean, who had retired after about 30 years there. And then earlier this year, in March, UT announced that WUTK was also going to come under the umbrella of WUOT, which was a big shift. UTK has just kind of existed sort of on its own. I mean,
it's kind of been almost forgotten by the administration, not by the listeners, of course, but it's almost like, it's like we've got this other radio station down here.
Right, and it's literally in the basement of Andy Holt Tower, which, of course, is the tower where a lot of the campus administration is. But the degree to which people on the upper floors of Andy Holt Tower ever even thought about what was going on in the basement, you never got much sense that that included. The university barely funded that, has barely funded that station. Smith has said that he took over in 2004. In 2009, of course, UT hit a huge budget crunch because of the tanking of the economy. And at that point, they really slashed their support, what little there was for that station. And Smith, and then the handful of sort of sales directors and marketing people who he's had in there, plus student workers, of course, over the years, have really had to fend for themselves significantly. Smith said that they raised collectively over, like the 15 years between 2009 and 2024, like $1.5 million from community donors, listeners, sponsors, alumni, all of that. But they kind of had to do all of that themselves. They had very little support, engagement, or attention from the university as a whole. So it's a pretty big change to suddenly bring them under WUOT, which is a much more, you might say, buttoned down, you might say professionalized, you might say corporate-ish operation. And also, part of Mazur's vision there has been to bring all campus media, which also includes land-grant films, the Daily Beacon, a Blaze magazine, sort of a conglomeration of various kinds of student media, bring them all together under the big umbrella of the College of Communication and Information in something that they're calling the Media Center. And this will eventually, I think, include some new facilities for a lot of those. There's a vision there, right? We're going to bring all these things together, and there's going to be synergy. There's going to be, opportunities for students to have different kinds of professional level experience and engagement, all of that kind of stuff. This is, interestingly, something almost identical to what Mazur did in his last job at Clemson. In 2019, he brought all of the existing student and campus media together into one big operation, sort of under the direction of the Department of Communications that he was heading at the time. And so it's kind of like, you think that maybe this is something he had in mind from when he first came in 2021. He had just done this in Clemson. He comes into UT, sees all these disparate media entities, has already had experience doing this. So I think you can kind of see there's a plan there. We're going to bring all of these things together. And I think what became tricky with WUTK is that UTK had operated for so long as sort of this, like you're saying, quasi-forgotten.
Certainly independent,
more or less autonomous operation, just left to its own devices, which on the one hand, like we said, meant that they had to raise a lot of their own money, but on the other hand, they had a lot of freedom. Nobody farther up the chain was paying a whole lot of attention to them. So what do these emails show? Well, a couple of things. Basically, Jody Hamblet became the direct supervisor of WUTK, became Smith's direct supervisor on April 1st of this year. Okay. That's one thing to keep in mind. On April 3rd, per these emails, Hamblet, who had presumably just flown in from somewhere, got into McGee-Tyson Airport late at night, was driving into town. She reported in this email at 2:30 a.m. on April 3rd. She's driving into town, listening to WUTK, probably thinking, okay, like, what have I gotten myself into here? Like, let's see what's going on at my radio station. And she hears a promo spot that says, WUTK, it's like a tongue punch to your fart box. And I think we can say fart box here on this podcast. And in fact, you can say fart box on the radio. Nothing about the phrase fart box is going to violate any FCC regulations. However, it may violate some people's sense of propriety.
It certainly did Hamblet.
Yes, Hamblet was not impressed or amused by this. So the next day, she gets in touch with Smith and, clearly says, like, what's this? Get this off the air. Don't do this again. And there's a series of emails between them talking about this, which includes the phrase fart box in the subject line of the email. This is one of those things, like when you file records requests, you don't know what you're going to get. You hope you're going to get something juicy. And as soon as I got this whole bundle of stuff and I'm scrolling through and I start seeing the phrase fart box a lot, I thought, aha, there's something.
Well, this will be interesting.
There's something going on here. And he basically said, oh yeah, that was recorded by some prior sales manager we had. I didn't even realize it was still in rotation. I've taken it off. And she was still not happy with that because she wrote back to him, you are personally responsible for everything that airs on here. And she said, I can't believe that you would allow this kind of, quote, bawdy humor to, go on the air in a produced segment. She was not happy about this. The next day, April 4th, she has a meeting with Smith about a separate incident where a student has filed a complaint that Smith was overbearing in berating her for something that happened at the station in March where there was some dead air for a little while. And in the complaint, the student said that Smith was well known for getting emotional and yelling and slamming doors when students messed up and so forth. Those of us who have known Benny and seen him around town for a long time, that may not be totally surprising. He's a pretty, his enthusiasms run high, and one can imagine that his dissatisfactions can sometimes maybe burn hot too. Apparently in this meeting, this was per a memo in these records, Smith presented some sort of other testimony from former students saying that they had learned a tremendous amount there and appreciated his quote-unquote tough love approach because he was trying to get them to act and behave as professionals and to teach them what being at a professional radio station meant. And of course, there is very little worse from a professional radio standpoint than dead air, so it's not surprising that that might be something that he would take very seriously.
Yeah, dead air is worse than fart box.
Definitely, from a broadcast standpoint.
Yeah.
And so then you start seeing some emails between Hamblet and Mazur. It just kind of becomes clear during this period from April, which is when Hamblet took over supervision, she is very quickly just kind of riding Smith's case, we could say. They're doing a software conversion. They want to bring in some new software that can better integrate WUTK with what UOT does. They want to professionalize the billing and invoice operations, which again had kind of been left to Smith's, direction. Nobody was really paying much attention. Interestingly, also in this period, Mazur and or Hamblet order or request an audit of WUTK, which Smith says had never happened. Whole 20 years he'd been there, they'd never had an audit. Suddenly they're getting audited, kind of out of nowhere, but it's not really out of nowhere because as we're talking about, there's a whole, there's a plan here. They're trying to professionalize and bring UTK in. They do this audit. There were interesting emails between Mazur and the auditors which I thought was interesting because, auditors are supposed to be this kind of outside, dispassionate. I mean, this is the internal audit function at UT, but even your internal auditors are not supposed to be subject to pressure especially from people who oversee the units that they're auditing. That's kind of, unusual. But obviously there have been discussions about what this audit is going to show, and Mazur is very eager as of May to get this audit. And he's saying, where's this audit? We need this audit. Hurry it up. And the people in the audit division are saying, oh, well, somebody's been out. We have a whole pile of stuff to get through. Sorry, we're working on it.
This isn't the only audit we're doing,
Right, exactly. And Mazur says, well, I really need this audit in order to take a personnel action. And the auditor, interestingly, writes back, because they had some prior discussion about this. The auditor writes back and said, oh, I was under the impression that you already had enough evidence to move forward on your disciplinary action even without this audit. Mazur writes back and says, I need this audit as the final piece of evidence in a history of underperformance. That's the phrase he uses, history of underperformance. And he says final piece of evidence. So again, like what you can see happening here is they are documenting various kinds of concerns, various kinds of, violations. What the audit ended up showing was basically their major findings was that UTK had a petty cash fund, which lots of operations do, keep petty cash around to do, small purchases and things that you need to do, of under $500. And the way that they were, the audit did not say that there was any evidence that like money was missing or anything like that. But the way they were operating and accounting for the petty cash fund violated UT policy and was a quote unquote high risk situation. And so they had to change that. Smith actually put out a statement this week saying that the way that he was doing the petty cash was the way he was trained to do it in 2009, and nobody from UT had ever been back to say anything about it ever since, and he just kind of kept doing it the same way. Again, nobody was really paying attention to them. The other they found that one worker at the station in one instance had accepted a payment for some station merchandise. They sell WUTK, shirts and stickers and so forth. Had accepted payment via Venmo, the online payment platform. Again, a violation of UT policy. Again, no indication that anything, that the money didn't go to the right place or anything. But so it's just kind of lots of like this operation, which nobody had paid attention to for 20 years, was not operating completely in accord with best accounting principles. Probably not a shock. And also the kind of finding that if you were not looking to get rid of somebody, would basically be like, okay, tighten up these things and do it the right way. And nobody would probably make a big deal out of it.
Yeah. I mean, as journalists, we've read through our fair share of audits, and it's, I won't say every audit, but it's not uncommon for there to be issues with the procedures. And, a lot of times it's only one person is keeping track of the account. You need to have somebody else do it as well. I mean, that's a fairly common problem that especially smaller entities have. And basically the auditor has this finding. Management, they tell management about it. Management has a response that is in the audit about what they're going to do to correct the action. That's just standard.
Yep, exactly. And so all of this is kind of happening over the period of a couple of months. Like I said, by the end of May, Mazur is already looking for this audit to take a disciplinary action that he's clearly is already planning. So that's at the end of May. We get to early July. There's some emails about setting up a meeting between Mazur and Hamblett and Smith, where Mazur tells Smith he wants to touch base on a few items having to do with WUTK. That's the setup for this meeting. July 9th, they go into a meeting. We don't know exactly what was said in the meeting, but there is a memo that comes out of that meeting that informs Smith he has been placed on administrative leave in order to give him time to consider his options given the workplace concerns that have been raised, which most likely include all of these things we're talking about, this concern with the student, this concern with some of the content on the air, concerns out of the audit. They're kind of putting all of this together into a pot and saying, we have these concerns, you're placed on leave. And then within less than a week, they reached a severance agreement essentially with Smith, which was also included in the documents that they sent. So that agreement pretty much gave the lie to the official story that came out. Although I don't think this was a surprise to anybody, because I don't know that anybody bought the official story that Smith just kind of decided out of the blue that he's going to retire at the end of the year. Like, clearly there was more to it than that. And what this agreement spells out, it doesn't specify any particular reasons or violations caused by Smith or any. It does not say here's the things that precipitated this. It just says that he will retire as of the end of the year. He's remaining on administrative leave, paid administrative leave. So that, like, right now to the end of December, he's still technically an employee of the university, but he's on leave. He has no engagement with the station. That is now under the interim leadership of the former sales manager there, who interestingly was the one who actually received that Venmo payment. But he's now been elevated to be the interim manager, and of course under Hamblett's direction. And they were ready to do this. That day on July 9th, right after they had the meeting with Smith, Hamblet immediately sends an email to Mazur saying, okay, here's like the next 5 or 6 steps we're doing, including redirecting all of Smith's emails to her own email account. All of that was set to go. So this was something they had planned out. They put him on leave and basically completed the absorption, I guess you could say, of WUTK into this new structure that they have there. And part of the deal with the severance agreement is that if Smith does not disparage or say anything bad about university leadership, the radio station, his employment there, anything through the end of the year when he's still technically on their payroll, he'll get a $75,000 payout in January. And so that's the deal. That's the deal they made with him, and this is why Benny Smith is leaving the station. And like, Scott, I don't know that this isn't a scandal, right? This is nobody. You can understand the motivations of all the players in this. Mazur comes in from someplace else where he already has this experience consolidating all of these media. He comes into UT and sees potential there. He sees some operations at UT that had been under long-standing management. Like I said, Regina Dean had been at WUOT for 30 years. Smith had been at WUTK for 20 years. And, Mazur probably comes in and sees, like, there's unrealized opportunities that are not being things that aren't being done here that could, because they're just kind of set in their ways, and we're going to unset their ways. First step in that is bringing Hamblet in, moving UTK under UOT, and like I said, it does look familiar to a lot of other ways that we've seen these kinds of things play out in sort of like the private sector media landscape.
Yeah, I keep going back to this idea that they had been on their own for so long. They had their own way of doing things, and they had the new regime comes in and says, no, this is how we want to do it, and there's inevitably going to be tensions there, and and there obviously were. They had, you go back to the fart box thing. They had their own unique way of promoting the station, and by the way, I listened to WTK and never had heard that particular promo.
I had not either. So, maybe it only aired at 2:30 a.m. I don't know.
Yeah, but another change that they made, and this kind of goes back to the connection with the community, is because over the years WTK had brought in community volunteers to be DJs for various programming, and they had their own shows. They played their own types of music. They had their own followings. It was a lot of that outreach to the community, and that was one of the things that went away.
Yes, very quickly.
Yeah,
Immediately after Smith was placed on leave, all of those community volunteers, many of whom had been providing, essentially free labor to the radio station for years and years, were quite unceremoniously informed, you can't come back.
Yeah.
We no longer need you. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I think that, again, speaks back to that community relationship that they built up, that a lot of units at UT do not have.
Yeah. Well, and it will be interesting now to see going forward with UTK under whatever new permanent leadership they eventually get. We'll see, to what degree they do try to maintain some of those connections. There's no reason that they have to drop their support of the local music scene just because Benny Smith's not there anymore. We know that he was certainly a champion for that. So whether or not that remains any sort of priority for the new leadership, we don't know. But in the meantime, of course, there's a lot of ill will and bad feelings in certainly the local music scene toward UT leadership over all of this, just because lots of people know Smith and are very attached to the station, and that's just a natural thing. So we will see.
So before we move on, I think we should edit a promo into the beginning just to keep the college radio station feel going. We can make a drinking game out of this segment of the show. Every time one of you guys says fart box, you drink. And we could probably have a pretty raucous weekend as the way this episode is started.
I don't know. We released this show on a Sunday morning. I don't know if we want to encourage people to
Well, we can make it a champagne bunch thing.
That's right. A mimosa.
Have a mimosa every time Jesse says fart box.
Okay. Another thing I wanted to talk about this week is Knox County Schools, because of a change in state law, is now informing parents and legal guardians if a student requests to be referred to by a pronoun and or a name that does not accord with the sex that is on their birth certificate. And this state law is one of many laws passed in recent years, pretty specifically targeting the state's transgender population in various ways. And of course, those bills have all been opposed by LGBTQ advocates across the state. And this was one that LGBTQ advocates felt particularly strongly about, because what we're really talking about here is outing people. And, the whole concept of outing in kind of like the LGBTQ community, it goes back a long way to when if somebody was identified as gay, or in this case as trans, it could have extremely negative repercussions for, their personal lives, their professional lives, so on and so forth. Some of that has changed over time as the Supreme Court, among other, and various state legislatures have recognized more and more civil rights for LGBTQ people, providing some protections. But the particular nexus of how and when young queer people come out to their families is a fraught one with a lot of history behind it, because there are a lot of stories out there, and not just historical stories, but contemporary stories of young people whose parents, guardians, whoever it is they live with, are not supportive of their sexual orientation or their gender identity, which can lead to any number of consequences, up to and including, people being thrown out of the house or running away from home and so forth, various kinds of abuse, anger, and so forth. It's every gay or trans person who you talk to will have their own story about how and when they came out. In some cases, it's, especially these days, it's more common for those stories to be positive, to be, oh, my parents always kind of thought this was the case and they were totally supportive, or, it was a surprise, but they love me, and so forth. So I think probably more positive stories these days than there used to be, but still obviously can be, it's the kind of thing that can, because of religion, culture, various other perspectives that people bring, it is a minefield. And so now it's a minefield that public schools have been just like thrust into by the state legislature. Up until now, it has been the case that, if somebody comes to a teacher who they like and trust, and says, hey, I've decided I want to be referred to this way, that's kind of been at that teacher's discretion. And the teacher does not have to tell anybody else about it. Well, that's not the case anymore. That safe haven that may have existed in schools for trans teenagers has been yanked away by the legislature, because now they gotta rat them out, essentially. If a teacher, if a student informs a teacher that they want to go by a different pronoun, or if their given name is James and they want to go by Judy or whatever, they have to inform their administration of that, their principals. The principal then has to meet with the student, and they have to inform the parent, guardian of this. They have to give the parent or guardian the opportunity to basically give permission and say, yes, that's fine. And then school personnel can refer to the student by the pronouns and names that they request. Although there's a different state law that also passed last year that says they can't be required to. And so, like, even if you have if you have a supportive parent and a generally supportive school environment, if there's one teacher there who's just like, I don't believe in this stuff, under state law, they can't be required to, because these are the kind of freedoms that are being protected in Tennessee these days, the freedoms to essentially continue to discriminate against people if that is your desire. So, of course, lots of concerns about this law when it passed. Now that it is coming into force, lots of concerns from LGBTQ advocates about how exactly it's going to be implemented, because the law doesn't really spell out that procedure. Each school system has to kind of figure out how they're going to handle this. In Knox County, what has happened so far is a total absence of any public discussion of this at all. Usually when a state law passes, that requires a change in school procedure of some kind, it comes to the school board for discussion as a new policy that needs to be discussed and adopted in order to keep the district in compliance with state law. For whatever reason, and they've already done that with several new state laws this year. We talked about them changing their policy on library materials and so forth. They had to do that to accord with state law, but they had a public discussion about it. The school board had to actually adopt it. In this case, there's been no discussion or information provided to the school board, to the public. Basically, if you are a parent of a queer student in Knox County now, or if you are a student in Knox County now and you want to know how is the school system implementing this law, you cannot get any information about it. It's not posted anywhere. What they did was send out a memo from school leadership and the county law department on August 6th to principals, saying, here's how you should handle this. The very first thing it says in there is, don't tell students about this law or about our practices on it. Like, they're giving explicit direction, don't tell anybody about this. And what this reads to me like, the law department, of course, their primary concern is always getting sued by somebody. Under this law, if the school system doesn't comply with it, a parent who thinks they weren't properly notified can file a lawsuit. And so the law department, we've both engaged with the county law department, the city law department. We know that lawyers in general tend to be extremely cautious about providing any information at all to anybody. Just kind of like, don't say anything. The best way to not get sued is just don't tell anybody anything. And so that's how this reads to me. Is the procedure that they've come up with is very protective of sort of like the legal interests of the school system. It does not really express anywhere in what they provided to principals an explicit concern for the well-being of the student or for the parents or the family that might suddenly be kind of thrown into consternation by just having this information dropped on them. So we will see if, I know some school board members privately have expressed some concerns about this. We'll see if some school board members, at some point push for at least some public discussion of, well, what are we doing and how are we doing it? I asked the school system if in devising these procedures, they had consulted with any local LGBTQ advocates, or even, I mean, there are LGBTQ people who work for the school system. There are teachers. There are absolutely LGBTQ parents and students in Knox County schools. Like, these are existing people. But the school system, as far as I can determine, did not consult with any of them. Just no perspectives from the actual community affected by this fairly substantial change were brought into this conversation at all, as far as I know. And that, for local LGBTQ advocates, that's a big problem. And so the Tennessee Equality Project has raised concerns about this and has said that Knox County is essentially over-complying with the law. They're taking a much more they're almost treating it like a disciplinary matter, almost a punitive approach to how they're approaching this. I talked to one parent who has a transgender daughter. This parent is supportive of her child, and the people at the school knew that, and the people and she said that actually in her experience with the school her daughter attends, which is L&N STEM Academy, that it's been fine, that teachers, the administration, everybody's been supportive, everybody's been basically cool with it. And the administrator who called her basically said, I know you know this, and I know you know that we know this, and nobody has any problem with this, but I have to tell you, your child has requested to go by, these pronouns and this name. And so this parent I talked to said, she, of course, was totally fine with it, but her concern was like, what about the parents and the families who don't know or aren't supportive or whatever? And she said to just kind of have this procedure where you just kind of call people and tell them this. In certain situations, the metaphor she used was like, you're throwing a bomb into this family's house and then just like walking away from it, because there's nothing in the procedure spelled out for like how to deal with it if the response is XYZ. The procedure, again, seems very much to be written to try to keep Knox County schools from being sued, and just there's nothing in what was provided to principals that even refers to the fact that this could be an extremely difficult and challenging topic to introduce into the domestic sphere. And so advocates are asking the school system to kind of revisit this and think about how they can bring in, at least refer people to resources if they're interested, have some of that kind of conversation, because so far it doesn't look like that's really been part of the internal school discussion at all.
Have any of the administrators that you've talked to noted any poor reactions, or like just kind of gotten that whole like what from the parent and a little freak out or anything like that?
Well, of course, nobody at the school system can talk about any individual case, but Allie Chapman, the representative of Tennessee Equality Project, they're the state's leading LGBTQ advocacy group. Chapman said that they have heard from students and families in other parts of the state already that there's been conflicts, people are afraid, there have been issues. So not aware of specific reports in Knox County, but also people might not, it's unclear how that would even necessarily come to public attention, how anybody's going to hear about it if there's a fight in one family about it or whatever, because all of that is going to be confidential. The other concern that Chapman raised that I thought was interesting was that this is in a very real way creating a paper trail and a file, because the school system is keeping track of every student and parent who is notified, and also what their responses are, because that guides kind of what they do within the school. Essentially, they're creating like a registry of transgender students in schools across the state. And, on one level, you can say, well, that's not a big deal. It's not illegal to be trans in Tennessee. But the response to that is, well, not yet. Texas, Governor Greg Abbott there a couple of years ago announced a new policy. I don't even think it came through the legislature. I think it was like an executive order, but he directed the state's Department of Child Services to start treating as child abuse any parent or family that provides gender-affirming care to a transgender minor. And they were about to launch investigations of supportive parents of transgender teens in Texas. That has been blocked by a court so far. They haven't been able to do that. But that kind of thing is on the minds of, it's already a felony now in Tennessee for a hospital or doctor to provide a gender-affirming care to a minor. The concern among parents is like, well, who knows how far they're going to go with these laws, and at what point the legislature might decide, we're going to do what Texas did. We're going to call this child. If you support your child in any way, we're going to call it child abuse. And oh, look, we now have this whole set of records of like every parent in the state who has said, yes, I support my transgender child. That's all going to be written down somewhere. It is confidential, but State Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti already requested confidential medical records from Vanderbilt University Medical Center about gender-affirming care they have provided, and the hospital turned it over. So anybody who thinks they're going to be protected by confidentiality rules around any of this, if the state, passes further, more restrictive laws, that's a concern there too. So it just, if you think about the actual status of transgender students in Tennessee schools, like this is already a very small, very marginalized population, very subject to bullying and harassment already. And then you have this whole other layer of the state, coming down on top of them, putting them even more under a microscope. And it's creating a lot of concern in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, and the one thing, you've got the the law about medical treatments, which is you could make an argument that yes, these are minors, they have to and we're talking about the name you go by informally at school, and they don't require you to register a nickname. I knew a guy in high school who went by Chip. Nobody that I know of ever used his first name. It was just.
I was going to ask
Chip.
that question. Like, is that like?
And
is that part of the policy?
Different.
It is actually. So that is discussed in the, and again, this isn't a policy because for whatever reason, they haven't adopted it as a policy. They just issued it as a directive, but it is discussed in there that, this doesn't apply to gender neutral names. The examples they gave were things like Ace or, Junior or whatever. But it does say that if there are close calls or gray areas, there'll have to be an internal discussion about it. And so that could be I think probably the pronouns are going to be the thing that they hinge it more on. It does also say that this doesn't apply to they, them pronouns, right? So there are people who identify as non-binary who ask to use they, them pronouns. The way this is written right now, it's not, because that is not, the state law was about a different gender than is on your, and they and them, because it can refer to anybody, is not, I guess, technically a violation of this. So it would have to be somebody who's identified as, male on their birth certificate asking for female pronouns. Yeah. So the procedure does talk about that, but those get into how, potentially tricky this is. And it also gets into how much time, leaving aside the concerns about the well-being of the students and families we're talking about here, the amount of administrative time and effort that each of these cases is going to take. And then some of the cases where it's like, like this one feels a little borderline. Does this qualify? Does this not? This is a priority that our state has, and this is a new priority. 5-6 years ago, we basically had very few state laws dealing with transgender people at all. Now we've got like a whole bunch of them, and this is a very tiny part of the Tennessee population. But for whatever reason, and of course we could I'll talk about what those reasons are. But our state legislature has made this a top priority of state government, that now tremendous amounts of state time, effort, record keeping, and so forth are being put into identifying and tracking our transgender population in various ways. This is a priority for the Tennessee state legislature. Whether or not it's a priority for basically anybody else in the state, I don't know.
I can add, anecdotally, at least so far, my eldest is a shortened version of his name. So it is a nickname, not his given name. But I have not gotten any reference on that. So at least, this isn't the case because this isn't my kid's name. But, Williams going to Bill doesn't seem like that's reportable by the current pseudo policy, I suppose.
Now, if William wanted to go by Billy with an IE at the end,
I mean, yeah, it's a good question.
Who knows? Those are the kinds of things that I guess they'll get into. So anyway, we wrote about this. Just kind of wanted to put it out there that this is going on. It will be interesting to see if there is any public discussion at some point of this, because, like I said, right now there just hasn't been. There's just almost zero transparency on this from the school system at this point in terms of what they're actually doing. We'll see if that changes. All right, Scott, let's talk a little bit about affordable housing. City Council approved, and this is something that the city does. They have an affordable housing fund that they use to help various projects around town. But this one was kind of a use of that in a somewhat new way, right?
Well, an uncommon way. It has been done before, but this is there is an apartment complex called the Pines out in West Knoxville. It's near Bearden Middle School. It was built in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and it was always built as an affordable housing complex. It's 152 units. It had when it got financed, when it was first built, had a 40-year affordability period, which meant they had to take, basically, it's a project-based Section 8 voucher program. So everybody in there has Section 8 vouchers, and they had to accept those for 40 years. Well, that expired. The owners of the build of the apartment complex could have just converted it over to market rate housing. Would have been easy for them to get renovation loans because it's little, the buildings are a little tired. It's been 40 years. So they could have done that. Well, what they did instead is they're selling it to LHP Capital, which is that's what they specialize in affordable housing. They've been around for a long time. So they bought it, and they wanted to get financing to help renovate the housing. Of course, it's still going to be affordable. So it's one of those things that we've talked about this before, how difficult it is to get your funding put together for this. It's multiple. The project overall is going to be $70 million, and the including the purchase price of the property and various other things. But they're in order to do that, they've got all kinds of funding sources. They've got tax credits, tax-free bond issue that they're going to do, a mortgage. They've got equity that they're putting in. One of the things that they decided to do was to go to the city, and the city has several funds for low-income housing. This is the Rental Rehabilitation Fund, and it uses federal funds to do things like this. So they went there. They're going to get $510,000 from that fund, and that does two things. One is, if you have debt like that associated with the project, you qualify for more tax credits. So they can have more tax credits, raise more money to be able to do better renovation of the housing. The other thing they're doing, and this is kind of the odd thing, is typically, when the city does incentives like this for affordable housing, it's in the form of a forgivable loan, and this is a 10-year note, and it would. So after as it goes, and you continue to have the units stay affordable, and by affordable under the federal definition of affordable, then at the end of the term, the loan goes away, and so it functions as a grant instead of a loan. But if you violate the terms, it does turn back to a loan. You've got to pay it all back. But if you do everything they say, at the end of 10 years, it's a grant. LHP said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to make it a 10-year balloon note of all things. And like I said, that helps with their capital. Because if it turned over back into a grant, then they might not have qualified for the tax credits. But it also does this: when they pay it back, this money comes back to the city. The $510,000 would come back to the city instead of just being forgiven at the end of the 10 years. So that's kind of the little quirk there. There's no controversy around that at all. Very few developers do that. I was talking to Alvin Nance, who's an executive with LHP Capital, and he said that they're the only, as far as he knows, they're the only ones who do it. This is their third, I believe, project where they've used this kind of financing to do that. And he was telling me, it's basically it's good for us and it's good for the city, and so because they get their money back, and and the net result of this is that these apartments that have been affordable again under the federal definition will remain so. Yeah, they will remain affordable. And it's funny, different funding sources have different affordability periods. I mentioned the one, the current owner, they're actually closing on the property this week. The current owner had a 40-year affordability period based on their financing package. This one, the city, under the city's portion of this, the affordability period is only 10 years. However, other sources have their requirements too. So overall, the project will have a 30-year affordability period. So for the next 30 years, that 152 units will be affordable. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the way that they have this set up is the city's portion is funding construction costs for 17 of the 152 units. Mm-hmm. That's about $30,000 a unit. Mm-hmm. So for 30 years of affordability.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think when we talk about affordability, you talked about the federal guidelines, but just to be clear on that, the federal guidelines for affordability is first of all, it can't exceed 30% of somebody's monthly income. The rent can't exceed 30% of somebody's monthly income. And typically also these are units that then are willing to accept like Section 8 subsidy, the various kinds of federal subsidies that people can use to rent apartments, right?
Yeah, there are a couple of different ways that Section 8 is used. You as an individual can get a voucher and use it at anywhere. That there are a lot of places that will accept them. There's a lot of places that won't. But this is a project-based thing, so all of these units automatically have Section 8 vouchers with them. So,
and people will be income qualified. And
it's most of the units will be for people who make up to 60% of the median income for the area, for the Knoxville area. The city, the units the city is financing, is only up to 50% of the.
So even lower income.
Even lower in that. It varies. The exact number varies with the size of your household, that sort of thing. But it's a little under $60,000 a year. So if you make less than $30,000 a year, 30,000 or less, these are the apartments you'd be able to get into these apartments.
Right. And obviously this is just a little piece, but it's just one more part of the sort of ongoing struggle for local governments to solve the problem of housing unaffordability, which we have talked about a lot.
And while this is an existing program, and it's a federal program done for housing that requires subsidies, the city, as we've mentioned before, is going to have a very similar program for people who have housing that's never been subsidized, but is low in price because, generally speaking, it's older. They're older. They might have smaller apartments. But they'll have subsidies for those landlords to do renovations as long as they keep the rents at a certain level.
Right. So lots of different approaches to it, and of course we've heard some ideas at the national level on the presidential campaign trail lately. So there may be other programs, federal programs coming in the future, depending on what all happens there. Okay. Also, speaking of housing, among other things, County Commission this week heard a couple of items related to the Thunder Mountain development down in South Knox County. Thunder Mountain is a developer that some years ago bought several hundred acres of land sort of in the Dry Hollow community off of Chapman Highway. This is almost all the way down to the Blount County line there, almost all the way to Seymour. If you're familiar with Chapman Highway, you drive past the big cemetery there. This is kind of the property that surrounds that cemetery, on all sides, behind it, north of it, south of it, et cetera. This development and we've written and talked about this before, this development has been controversial for several years now. Local residents out there in what is still a fairly rural area, mostly characterized by small, narrow roads, apart from Chapman Highway itself, of course. They have been very concerned about the impact because we are talking about essentially hundreds of units of new housing coming in there in a much greater density than most of the housing that exists out there. And also, there's been concern about the future of Bauer Field, which is a county park that is mostly run by a local athletics association there, and it's essentially it's a youth baseball complex that's been down there going back, I think, to the late 50s, early 60s is when it was first established, and then came under the supervision of County Parks and Rec at a certain point, although still mostly locally run in terms of the programming. But the county does not own that property, and the Bauer Field Athletic Association does not own that property. It was owned by, a local landowner there who had given them long-term leases for, like $1 or whatever. But then eventually did sell that property, and Thunder Mountain bought that property along with its other surrounding properties a few years ago. And the existing lease at Bauer Field runs through 2031. So there's another 7 years on it, essentially. And Thunder Mountain can't do anything about that and has said, no, we're not going to mess with that lease. But in the meantime, we want to go ahead and rezone this property because when that lease is up, we're going to do other things with it. It's not going to continue to be a baseball complex. Now, Thunder Mountain has also donated about 100 acres of the property that it bought to Legacy Parks Foundation. Most of that property is up on a hillside, ridgetop area that wouldn't be good for development anyway, but that will now be preserved. There may be some hiking and biking trails on it at some point, but there won't be any kind of development there. And then about 20 acres of that property is in a flat area that Thunder Mountain donated, saying, well, this is where you could move the baseball fields to. Essentially, County Mayor Glenn Jacobs came out a month or two ago and kind of announced that whole deal and committed the county to saying, yes, we're going to do this. We will create a new sports complex here that will include baseball fields and so forth sometime between now and 2031. Worth noting, as many community residents did in continuing to oppose all of this, that there is not actually any specified timeline for doing that, and there is also, crucially, no budget for it right now at all. It's not in the existing capital plan or anything. So what County Commission had to deal with this past week was approving a change to the brand new county comprehensive land use plan to redesignate that area where the Bauer Field Park is right now for mixed use development in the future, because even though the county just adopted this new plan in May, it still refers to that as a park area, essentially, because that's the existing use that's on it. And in adopting the new plan, they explicitly did not go and redesignate existing county parks for like future development, because that probably would have prompted a whole lot of opposition.
Oh yeah, that would have been a mess.
But because the property is now owned by this other owner who does have future plans for it, Thunder Mountain came and said, well, we would like to make this change. And so one of the things that was interesting here is this is the first official amendment that the county has made to its brand new plan that it just adopted in May. And some of the people opposed to it, including the Knox Community Planning Alliance, said, whoa, you just adopted this plan. And also in adopting this plan, you said that you would only consider amendments to it on a quarterly basis. Under the old plan, they were kind of doing this willy-nilly every month. They were adopting amendments to the plan. But this is a new plan. It's up to date. And so, the thinking was like, let's stick to the plan we just adopted. And at the most, there's only going to be 4 times a year that you will consider amendments to it. And this proposal came outside that window. So it went to Planning Commission in July when it should have come in August if they were going by the quarterly schedule that they've set. And that meant that because it came through Planning Commission in July, it came to County Commission in August. And so Kevin Murphy from the Knox Community Planning Alliance stood up and said, you guys shouldn't even be hearing this right now. You're straight out the gate. You just adopted this new plan and this new timetable, and you are immediately violating it. Like, this doesn't give a whole lot of confidence that you're really going to stick to this thing that you just adopted. But there was back and forth about that. Thunder Mountain said, hey, look, we actually first applied for this back in November under the old plan, and then we tabled it, but it should still count that we applied then. Anyway, they ended up approving it. The majority, I think it was 8 commissioners, voted to, yes, go ahead and do this, recognizing that the circumstances have changed because now you have a new owner of this property that does have other intentions for it. They're not going to renew the lease, so it's not going to stay a park. Mm-hmm. And also that they have donated property. There is a plan, sort of. There's
there are intentions.
There are intentions. There are stated commitments, although nothing exactly in writing, that the county will build a new facility there. And several commissioners, assured the community, like, look, we're going to do this. We promise. We are. And, there were people saying, well, it's going to cost $15 or $20 million to build a new park down here. A little unclear exactly where that number came from, but the county doesn't have a lot of money, as we know. Where are you going to get this? How is this going to get done? And the commissioner said, look, don't worry, we're doing this. You'll have it. It'll be there for you. And they did go ahead and approve it. And those were the last couple of pieces. They also approved rezoning on another adjacent piece of Thunder Mountain property down there. Those were the last few pieces. So now Thunder Mountain has assembled and gotten the zoning that they want on all of these properties. And so now they will be drawing up an actual development plan for the whole thing.
That plan includes new commercial development along Chapman Highway.
Yeah.
That right now there's not a lot of development in that stretch of Chapman Highway.
That's right.
And so they have the intent to obviously to develop the properties that front Chapman,
including the current Bauer Field,
current Bauer Field property, and one of the things that's also like the really deadly stretch of Chapman Highway.
Yeah.
So you kind of wonder if they do that, would that development have the influence traffic in a way that slow it down?
Yeah.
Or would it just make it more dangerous because there are a lot of turns going to have to be made right there? So that'll bear a lot of scrutiny.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the arguments by including current Commissioner Carson Daly there, who supports this project, one of the arguments he made about moving or creating a new sports complex is the area that Thunder Mountain has donated for that is a bit removed from Chapman Highway. The current Bauer Field complex is right up against Chapman Highway, and the parking area for it is actually on the other side of it's on the west side of Chapman. The fields are on the east side, so everybody coming there has to actually cross Chapman there, and there's not a stoplight there or anything, and so that's part of the arguments from the developers and from Daly was that this is actually going to be safer once we get a new complex there. So again, we will see how all that plays out, but the big picture is that despite ongoing well-organized opposition from the communities down there, Thunder Mountain has been able to basically assemble the properties and get the zoning that they want to move ahead with what is going to be a very large project that the local residents are right. It is going to transform the sort of feel and look and just functioning of that whole area. It will not be quite the quiet little corner of the county that it is right now.
Nope.
Okay, the one other thing that I thought we could talk about, Scott, is our power poll this week. The power poll, as listeners and readers probably know, is something that we do every month in cooperation with PowerPoll, which is an independent organization based in Nashville. They operate these kinds of, it's a survey of community leaders. You could say it's kind of trying to take the elite temperature of
the people, the influencers and the decision makers of a community. It is. They are elite, but they're also the ones who push the buttons.
Right. These are government leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, all of those kinds of people. The poll goes out to, and we come up with local questions here every month. And this month we actually asked about football, which, Scott, you can talk about a little bit if you want. But the kind of piggybacking on that, the Central Power Poll folks also put out their own just 2-question poll about the presidential race. And we actually did a local poll on that a month ago around all the questions about President Joe Biden and whether people thought he should stay in the race and whether people thought he could win. And that poll last month, and we should say that the power poll numbers do tend to lean a little more liberal / Democratic or blue than the Knox County population as a whole, which is not really a surprise for lots of demographic reasons in terms of the kinds of people who end up in leadership positions tend to be more educated. More educated people tend to, at the national level, tend to vote more Democratic and liberal. That's a consistent thing. So there is a bit of a blue tint, we should say, to the power poll results. But what was interesting was last month, a majority of people said they were going to vote for Biden, but they thought he was going to lose. So this month, the power poll folks asked about Harris versus Trump, and what did we find out?
Well, a few more people said they were going to vote for Harris. I believe Biden was 57% or so. 64% were going to vote for Harris, but a 62% said they thought Harris was going to win. They predicted this is a predictive question, and they predicted a Harris victory, which Biden's numbers were in the low 20s.
Right.
So
very few people last month thought Joe Biden was going to win.
These are people who were going to vote for Biden, but were pessimistic about his chances.
Yeah.
And now there are people who are going to vote for Harris, but are very optimistic about her chances.
And of course, this poll comes during the week of the Democratic National Convention, which has been, a gigantic, glitzy pep rally, essentially. And so, I guess it's maybe not a surprise that people who are inclined to that side of the voting booth are feeling jazzed up, because we just had this great, those numbers could change in a month depending on what happens in the presidential campaign. But it's a local glimpse of something that I think people have written about at the national level, which is just a real shift in this presidential race in sort of enthusiasm among Democrats and or anti-Trump people that, just a month ago, they didn't want Trump to win, but they thought he was going to. And now they still really don't want Trump to win, but now they think they've got a pretty good shot at actually beating him.
Yeah, and really, to go back again, this is a survey. It's on a scientific poll. As we said, it skews a little bit blue, and so inevitably, almost every month when we run one, somebody will say, "Oh, yeah, but that's not."
It's not representative of Knox County as a whole.
It is not. I mean,
nor is it designed to be.
No, and in fact, anybody who thinks Harris will finish first in Knox County is probably sadly mistaken.
It would be historically well, I don't know about that. No, I think Bill Clinton probably won Knox County.
Might have.
I'm not sure. So I don't know if it's true that a Democrat has never won Knox County. We'd have to go back and look at that.
But Trump got 56% of the vote 4 years ago.
No, definitely in recent decades, Republican presidential candidates have run between 55 and 60%. Although, like we talked about the other week, that number has been it was over 60%. In the elections when Obama ran, and it has slid down under 60% in the last couple of times Trump's been on the ballot. In fact, Trump's numbers in 2020 in Knox County were lower than they were in 2016.
That's true.
And so it'll be interesting to see, where the 2024 numbers come in. But you're definitely right. It would be a surprise. Well, let's put it this way. If Kamala Harris wins Knox County, that's probably going to be a good sign for her in lots of places.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
country.
Absolutely. So,
I think I got it best. I think I saw a meme earlier today. It might have been shared into the colloquy on the maybe the explainer for why the optimism for people who are voting for the Democrats are more optimistic about Harris than Biden. It was you had me at complete sentences.
Yeah,
I thought that was the most succinct way to put how the feeling about this ticket has changed since the last poll came.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there was clearly just this desire. I mean, first of all, there are a whole lot of people who don't like Donald Trump, obviously, and they really wanted somebody who could go out and kind of take the fight to him and sock him in the nose. And now they've got somebody who's doing that. The Harris Walz ticket is out there popping him in the nose basically every day, and this whole Democratic National Convention was a whole lot of that over and over and over again. So, we don't know how it's going to turn out. The national polls are very close. The swing state polls are very close. It's going to be a very close election. The last two elections were also very close. So, nobody knows exactly how this is going to turn out. But it looks like a real fight now, and I think that's the difference. A month ago, It did not look like a real fight.
Yeah, a month ago, it was only a question margin of victory.
Yeah,
and now it is a true question of who is going to win.
Yep. All right. Well, that's all the national punditry that we're going to do here, because that's mostly not our bailiwick. Scott, we can look ahead to this coming week. Couple of things. County Commission will hold its monthly voting meeting on Monday. Just to be clear, the meeting that they had this past week where we were talking about Thunder Mountain, that was their monthly zoning meeting. This is their regular agenda. Not a whole lot of, certainly nothing controversial on there that I know of so far. There is an interesting deal there related to the Prosperity Crossing project out around the Watt Road exit from the interstate that we will be writing about this week, and Commission is going to vote on that on Monday. That meeting is at 5 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City-County building. And then Scott, the Joint Knoxville-Knox County Sports Authority is meeting.
Yeah, they're meeting on Tuesday morning. This is their annual meeting where they get together and vote on leadership. The slate of candidates already put forward is same as last year, same as the year before. Alvin Nance, who we mentioned earlier, is the would be the chair. Nikisha Thompson would be vice chair. Richard Bass would be the treasurer secretary, and Jeff Haygood will be the assistant treasurer secretary. And that's their current slots now. So be pretty much the same leadership team. They're also going to get, an update on construction. If you haven't been by there lately, it's out of the ground. It's beginning to look
the new downtown stadium there, just east of the old city.
And the stadium is taking shape. They're pretty much everything is framed in, I guess you could say. You've got the hotel and the condo building that are adjacent to the stadiums going up. So there's a lot going on. There'll be there will be an update on construction at this meeting, as well as other updates on the infrastructure, on minority business participation. And one thing that they haven't talked about a lot are the public infrastructure improvements that'll be going around the stadium. For instance, there's going to be a big plaza kind of between the Hall of Fame Drive overpass there and the entrance to the stadium. In fact, it'll be about the same size as Market Square. It's a good size space. But of course, there's a lot of construction going on for the stadium right now that will you can't really go in and do anything out there yet, but they're going to get an update on kind of a timeline of when those improvements will be coming in, and everything's pointing to an April opening. So,
I saw that the Knox One Soccer had signed their paperwork to be the
One Knox.
One Knox. I always do that backwards. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
for all the soccer fans here in Knoxville.
Actually, it's technically One Knoxville. People use One Knox and One Knoxville kind of interchangeably, but.
But I saw that they'd signed their paperwork to be so they will officially be kicking off their next season there as well. I saw that happen this week.
Yeah, that's been the plan for a couple of years. But they actually went. They've been living together for 2 years now. They're married.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I would just recommend if anybody hasn't. First of all, if you haven't driven by there at all recently, it's worth driving by. But one view that I find very instructive, mostly I've kind of been seeing it from the Hall of Fame overpass, which is where you can, you see the field taking shape and the stands and all of that. But I was out in East Knoxville this past week and drove back into downtown down Dandridge Avenue, and coming down from, the intersection of Hill and Dandridge there toward the old city, you can see the housing that's going up in that far corner of the stadium, which you can see from Hall of Fame, but it looks different from the other side. You can really see the sort of scope and scale of it. Like even just by itself, that's a large housing development that's going on right there.
Yeah, one of the views I like to do, of course, I've gone down from time to time and taken photos as we've run stories on the progress of the stadium. I might do this again next week. Who knows? But there's the convenience store there on the corner of Hall of Fame and Summit Hill. or Dandridge, I guess. Right there. Is that Dandridge or somebody?
I'm not actually sure. Maybe it doesn't become Dandridge till you cross Hill.
I'm not sure.
Summit Hill / Dandridge.
Yes, but there's the convenience store there. There's also a street that goes down to where the construction site is. You can't go through there, obviously, but you can go down there and park off to the side and take a look at it, and that gives you the view from center field, essentially, where you can see the grandstands and the shape of the grandstands. Then you can see the apartment buildings and the apartments and condos going in, and see those and get a really good idea of the scale of what's going in out there.
It's a big project.
It's a big project. It was, I think it was funny when it's just being talked about. You'd go and you'd look, man, how are they going to fit a stadium and basically 3 apartment buildings? How are they going to fit all that right there? Well, now you know. It is a big, big project. So,
all right. Well, we may have more updates on that depending on what comes out of the Sports Authority meeting. We will be back next week to talk to you about those things and anything else that happens. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here with Barbarian Productions. He gives us a tongue punch. I don't even
drink.
I don't even know what that means. Our theme music is by Will Wright. We will talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily, in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.